Dr. Khadka, we are live on Facebook. Now over to you.
Okay, should I start?
Yes,
Yeah?
you can start.
Okay.
It's 5:45 already.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Sama. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Prabin Khadka, one of the coordinator members for this webinar. Welcome to episode 15 of the IIDS webinar series on politics, economy, and public policy. We are gathered here today to hear Dr. Shobha Paudel talk about our ongoing research project titled Cost-Benefit Analysis of Climate Smart Agriculture in the Agro-Ecological Zones of the Gandaki River Basin of Nepal. Dr. Paudel belongs to the research department of the Policy Research Institute, which is a think tank of the government of Nepal. She has several years of interdisciplinary research experience in climate change adaptation, food security, disaster risk education, and environmental economics. Dr. Paudel completed her PhD in Global Environmental Studies from Kyoto University, Japan. Her work on environmental issues has been supported, among others, by the government of Japan, UNESCO, and the Asia-Pacific Network for Global Change Research. Dr. Paudel is extremely well published in reputed science journals. Our discussant today is Dr. Gyami Shrestha, who is the director of the US Carbon Cycle Science Program. Dr. Shrestha received a PhD in environmental science from the University of California, Merced. Interfacing with scientists, funders, practitioners, and diverse partners, Dr. Shrestha supports, leads, conceptualizes, and executes multi-agency coordination activities, inter-agency funding, partnerships, research, assessments, and public engagement on carbon, climate change, and pertinent environmental themes. Her work on environmental issues has been published in leading journals. For a fascinating work and background, please visit Dr. Shrestha's website. A polite reminder of some of our ground rules, ladies and gentlemen. Please keep your mics muted unless you're invited to speak. Dr. Paudel will speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, which will be followed by comments from Dr. Shrestha. Please send your questions at the end of Dr. Paudel's talk using the chat forum or raise your hands using the Zoom feature. Dr. Paudel, over to you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prabinji. It's very nice. And you introduced very nicely. Namaste and greetings from Kathmandu. Thank you, IIDS, this webinar organizing team, for this opportunity. I am honored and privileged to be here today to share my research preliminary findings. I'm Shobha Paudel. Currently, I belong to Policy Research Institute, already nicely presented by Dr. Prabin. Today, I'm going to share some preliminary findings of one research project that has been awarded by Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World, OWSD, under the UNESCO program. I share screen here. I have made a few slides based on this research. Okay, is it visible?
Yes, Dr. Paudel, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. Why I'm talking about climate smart agriculture and why cost benefit analysis. Climate smart agriculture is pertinent to tackle with climate change and to transform the agriculture system to adapt to the changing climate. So from this webinar, I expect you can learn something about global climate change trend, climate change impacts in the global level, regional level, and local level. Then how the climate smart agriculture came into the discussion and discourse and in practice and program policies. Then what is cost benefit analysis? Why we need cost benefit analysis? For every program, we have to do cost and benefit analysis, even our personal investment as well. Then how cost benefit analysis can be integrated in agriculture policy and planning. Mainly, we will focus on these issues in today's webinar. Well, I like to share, okay, this simulated figure and real observed global climate change trend to show the global climate change trend. Here in the upper figure A, this is the annual mean temperature change at 1 degree centigrade global warming. And the first, this map is the observed changes, and the next one is simulated. There is not so much different in simulated and observed in 1 degree centigrade global warming in the land, but in sea area we can see slightly difference in simulated area. And in the B, we can see from 1850 to 1900 how the earth is burning in 1.5 degree centigrade, 2 degree centigrade, and 4 degree centigrade. So, sorry. So how the earth is burning in rising temperature. So we have to know the phenomena of climate change, how the climate is changing all over the world. So I derived this, I took this finding from IPCC 2021. They published this result in last October. Similarly, yeah, we can see the observed and simulated one in larger view here from 1850 to 2020. We can see how the global surface earth temperature is changing in this between time period. So let's talk about the regional basis. Here, it is the extreme, hot extreme, heavy precipitation, and changes in agriculture and ecological system. Here we can see that South Asia, in the figure in left side, the increasing and decreasing, no change. We can see here, South Asia, the hot extreme is increasing. And similarly, in the case of precipitation also, more intense and more frequent precipitation are observed in South Asia. So heavy precipitation, we also observed the heavy precipitation in October, November in Nepal also, and we had heavy loss agricultural, particularly paddy loss in post-monsoon flood. So this type of extreme events cause extreme like landslides, flood, sea level rise, glacial retreat in our higher Himalaya, and similarly in the our lowland area, depletion of water resources, biodiversity loss, and species, species loss, translocation, and increase the risk of vector-borne disease. So mainly because of the climate change, we can see loss in agricultural production, and it leads to threat to food security in the case of Nepal. So why this type of loss are happening every year in Nepal, and how Nepal is tackling with this climate-induced disaster, and what would be the climate adaptation practices to adapt to these changes. Here I have taken some picture during my field visit, and I have shown here. Okay, sorry. This Omicron variant affected me. So sometimes I have some problem in my throat. Sorry for that. So to tackle with the climate change, it in disaster, climate smart agriculture believe to increase production, enhance resilience, and to reduce and to remove the greenhouse gas emission where possible. And it helps to achieve the national food security and sustainable development goals. There are three pillars of climate smart agriculture. CSA, particularly we focus on three important pillars: increase productivity and increase resilience or adaptation power, and reduce the greenhouse gas emission where it's possible. So in recent year, around, here in climate smart agriculture, it is an integrated approach to develop technical and policy and investment condition to achieve sustainable agriculture development for food security under climate change. So what is this climate smart agriculture means? And it integrates three dimensions of sustainable development. These are economic, social, environmental. And it brings together practices, policies, and institutions. Actually, climate smart agriculture is not new concept. Our generation, our past generation have been applying and practicing these practices for ages, but the farmers are not quite familiar. These are climate smart agriculture practices. So, and the concept of climate smart practices mainly focus on social, economic, environmental prospect and application of indigenous local knowledge to adapt climate change to minimize the risk induced by climate-induced disaster. Okay, then how this climate smart agriculture came into like in the discourse and discussion. So first in 2010, FAO introduced the term climate smart agriculture in first global conference on food security and agriculture, food security, agriculture and climate change in Netherlands. Then in 2012, the second global conference in Vietnam, they published the climate smart agriculture book, and they introduced to the farmers about the benefit of climate smart agriculture, especially to the vulnerable peoples in the least developed and developing countries. And in 2013, in third global conference in South Africa, particularly climate smart agriculture started, discussion started from 2013, and 2014 from Climate Summit in New York, the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture Action Plan was prepared for the effective implementation of climate smart agriculture. Well, then what is cost benefit analysis? Why we are talking about cost benefit analysis here? Because, when we invest in for example, in our private investment, we always evaluate whether it is economically beneficial for us or not. In the case of climate smart agriculture, is it really feasible to the farmers or not? Not only climate smart agriculture, most of the program and policies that are going to be implemented or already in the implementation phase. So we have to do evaluation of the program and policies. So one of the best method is cost benefit analysis. So the cost benefit analysis may be ex ante or ex post. So it helps to identify efficient solution in resource scarce society and minimize the cost or maximize the benefit. From the cost benefit analysis, we can calculate whether the policies program can minimize the cost or maximize the benefit, or whether the implementer, for example, in the case of climate smart agriculture, whether the small scale farmers are economically beneficial by applying these practices or not. So climate smart agriculture not only consider private or individual cost and benefit, it integrates the social or environment benefit as well. We have different methods or indicator of calculation to calculate the cost benefit analysis, like net present value, present value of benefit minus present value of cost. Then we can see if we invest now, then what will be our benefit or our income after our return after 10 years. So when the net present value is greater than 0, then it is considered economically profitable or viable investment. Similarly, benefit and cost ratio, if it is greater than 1, we consider this option is economically viable. Then higher internal rate of return. If our investment rate, like discount rate in cost benefit analysis, we often call it discount rate. Discount rate, the internal rate of return is higher than discount rate, then it is in the budget is acceptable. So let's see one case study so far we have completed. This project, cost benefit analysis of climate smart agriculture in the agro-ecological zone of the Gandaki River Basin of Nepal. For this research, I have been awarded Early Career Women Scientist Fellowship for this research from the UNESCO. So I'm going to share the preliminary finding of this research. So we have done research in Nawalpur district. Why we chose Nawalpur? Because in Nepal, climate smart agriculture practices are applied few selected districts as a pilot study. So one of them is Nawalpur. So we chose 2 municipalities and 2 wards from these 2 municipalities because the farmers are applying climate smart agriculture practices, and these 2 villages are climate smart village. So our main objective was to develop CSA prioritization framework, like how the farmers prioritize the agricultural practices. So what are are these practices are increase the productivity or minimize the greenhouse gas emission or enhance the resilience of small scale farmers. So based on 3 pillars, how farmers prioritize the agriculture CSA practices. So what are the major costs and benefit of applying these practices for from the farmer perspective? Similarly, the CSA not only generated private profitability, and it also generated externalities associated with implementing these practices. We try to assess the value of externalities as well, and we try to incorporate the estimated value of externalities in the cost benefit analysis of CSA practices. So from the result here, their farmers were applying 16 practices. Among them, these 6 practices were highly applied by the farmers and high interest practices. We asked them to choose the practices given the value from 0 to 4 based on 3 pillars that I mentioned earlier. And they chose these 6 practices, and from different category like energy smart, jab planter, believed to reduce the carbon emission, because jab planter doesn't emit any carbon, and energy smart, like improved seed and solar water pump, biopesticides, organic fertilizer, zero tillage. And these are based on the crops also, like zero tillage for wheat, organic fertilizer apply most of the crops in Nepal. And we chose only 3 crops. These are the main staple crops for Nepal. And we interviewed 100 farmers. And the interesting result is in conventional agriculture practices, almost all farmers practice or cultivate rice. But in the case of climate smart agriculture practices, there is heterogeneity, like jab planter only apply for maize, and this practiced by only 62.36% farmers of total from the total. And then similarly, improved seed, almost all farmers, like all crops, rice, maize, wheat, they practice like 27%. And solar water pump, the highest percentage apply in maize, interestingly. And zero tillage only for wheat. 50% of the farmers practice zero tillage. So here, I drag this one here. Okay. We calculate NPV, IRR, BC, and K ratio, and payback period. Not only we think about NPV, then we also think of the payback period when we get the return from the investment also. So payback period is also important factor in cost benefit analysis. Here, some are interesting results are here. I would like to share with you. Okay, organic fertilizer. Rice has higher NPV in organic fertilizer compared to biopesticides, and it followed by solar water pump. Then wheat. In the case of wheat, improved seed has higher NPV, and also internal rate of return is also higher. And for organic fertilizer, in the case of rice, internal rate of return is also higher. And it seems the economically profitable practices for rice cultivators. And for wheat cultivators, improved seed seems to be the economically acceptable practices. Yeah, these are, and for in the case of maize, we here solar water pump, it has negative NPV. So it means it may be the higher installation cost of solar water pump. So the investment is greater than return. So it might have the NPV 0, and the IRR is also very low, only 6%. BC ratio is also less than 1. So from these results, we can say that not all the practices are equally profitable to the farmers in different crops. We see here, as I already mentioned, rice, organic fertilizer, and wheat for improved seed. These may be the scale out practices in the future. Not all the practices are economically profitable to the farmers. So after the economical analysis, we try to incorporate the externalities here also. But because of some limitation, we could not monetize all the externalities. So we only consider some social aspect like generation of labor and social harmony. These are totally qualitative, and we conducted stakeholder workshop and farmer workshop to identify the externalities associated with these practices in the studies of villages. And externality generated by applying these CSA practices are like carbon sequestration, productivity, social, soil fertility, biodiversity, investment, income, and natural beauty as well. But we could not calculate the carbon sequestration. So now we are trying to calculate the biomass, and then we are doing another project on this biomass calculation to calculate the carbon sequestration in the study area. Maybe we will incorporate the finding of carbon sequestration in the next phase. And we try to, we try to see the impact on labor after installation of these CSA practices. We try to identify the numbers, and we calculate the labor charge, and for different practices, for different 6 practices in the case of labor, and this we incorporate in social externalities. So then what is the implication in agriculture policy and planning? As cost benefit analysis is important for agriculture policy and planning to generate evidence-based policy making, or to generate evidence for policy making in the policy making. And not only policy making, like this climate smart agriculture practices is already like implementation is already 5 years. So it is the right time to evaluate whether this program is economically beneficial to the farmers or not. Only issuing the policy and formulating the policy is not sufficient. The matter is its effective implementation, or whether it could achieve its objective or not. So cost benefit analysis is very important tools to generate the evidence for policymakers. Similarly, while developing agriculture policy and planning, need to identify the synergy and trade-off between food security, adaptation, and mitigation. Only the adaptation, sometimes we do adaptation plan, mitigation plan. We don't look from the point of food security. Sometimes we overlooked food security perspective. So it is always very important to identify the synergy and trade-off. Here, I would like to share some why Nepal agriculture policy or some policy are failed sometimes. Yeah. We fail to address, or we fail to evaluate, like we fail to identify the synergy between the impact or different perspective. Similarly, here why I'm talking about Nepal's agriculture policy. In 1995, agriculture perspective plan was developed for like 1995 to 2015, 20 years. But it could not achieve its objective. And sometimes some agriculture practitioner and expert said the agriculture policy prospective plan is failed because it's cannot envision in long term. One example is this 20 years in Nepal, there is some huge change in agriculture sector, like feminization of agriculture. The number of female farmers are increasing, but the agriculture prospective plan failed to address this long-term change in agriculture sector in Nepal. So it is very important to envision the long-term plan and program while formulating the agriculture policy and programs. Similarly, gender analysis that I mentioned already, feminization of agriculture, most of in our policy, these policies are failed to do gender audit. Whether this policy and program incorporate gender, all the stakeholders of society, not only men and women, all the beneficiary of this program and policy, it is very important to incorporate all the like ethnic group, different stakeholders, and the unprivileged societies, and etc. So here I am in last of my presentation almost. So some thoughts I want to share with you. Climate change, we talk about global climate change, regional climate change, but climate change is global issue, but it happens in local level. So I feel, and I am am impacted by the climate change. So it is the local things. So it should be localized. In like the country who dependent on agriculture, low income, that are highly vulnerable to climate change, and they have negative impact. For this type of region and this type of economy, climate smart agriculture is supposed to growth agriculture productivity, enhance resilience, and to reduce the greenhouse gas emission to achieve the sustainable development goal. Similarly, that I already mentioned about climate-induced disaster. This climate change adaptation and disaster reduction should be incorporated in agriculture policy also. In sometimes these climate change adaptation and disasters are totally overlooked where developing the policy and program. So it is very important to incorporate climate change adaptation and disaster reduction in policy and program. One important thing is climate smart agriculture is not only practice, it is location specific. The practices which one is applied or which one is economically viable in the certain region doesn't necessarily applicable or will have the same result in other location. So while developing agriculture policy, while scale out the program or policy, we have to think from the location specific, sector specific across the, and it applies across the scale. Well, and yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I shared this photo during my field visit, and this photo got the award from NF's UK in 2019 in Women in Science Day. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Paudel, thank you for such an insightful presentation. Most of us are well aware of the impacts of climate change, but your presentation, I hope, has helped our viewers understand how this has already started shaping our lives in Nepal, we know, which is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. Now I'd like to request Dr. Shrestha to give her comments on your research. Thank you. Dr. Gyami Shrestha, over to you.
All right. Namaste and greetings from Northern Virginia. Dr. Shobha Paudel, first of all, I would like to congratulate you on your outstanding scholarly research and achievements. Secondly, I would like to thank you for your illuminating presentation on cost-benefit analysis of climate-smart agriculture in Nepal. I would also like to thank IIDS and, IISC, it's confusing, and particularly PhD candidate Sudim Nadahal for inviting me to serve as discussant for this seminar. Thanks to Dr. Prabin Khadka for moderating, and to Samar and Devika who are part of the organizing team. So now I will begin the discussion by highlighting the major points from Dr. Shobha Paudel's talk. Climate change is a global problem with massive and disproportionate impacts at local scales. As the IPCC has assessed, and as populations have experienced, South Asia and Nepal are now experiencing severe climate change. The Nepalese agricultural sector, which has already been suffering for decades, is now facing dire risks which will only get worse in the near future if we don't actively implement and adopt and facilitate climate smart agriculture all across the nation. The Food and Agriculture Organization describes climate smart agriculture as an approach that helps guide actions to transform agri-food systems towards green and climate resilient practices. The three main objectives are to sustainably increase agricultural productivity and incomes, to adapt and build resilience to climate change, and to reduce and or remove greenhouse gas emissions wherever possible. Dr. Shobha Paudal's presentation illustrates the interventions that could address the knowledge gaps between the cost and effectiveness of climate smart agriculture practices that are now being adopted and implemented by small-scale farmers to grow rice, wheat, and maize, the most staple crops of Nepal in the Gandaki River basin of the nation. The cost-benefit analysis that Dr. Paudal just spoke about as a policy and program evaluation method is useful to quantify the economic value of climate, to develop a climate prioritization framework by the farmers themselves. So as we all learned from this presentation, what constitutes a climate smart agriculture practice has to be context specific, and it has to depend on local socioeconomic and climate change and environmental factors. And as the Food and Agricultural Organization recommends, there has to be an evidence base for any climate smart agriculture practices in order to support and enable different policy frameworks, and in order to strengthen national and local institutions, and also to enhance funding and financing options for those different practices. So it is clear that the local farmers will benefit from the outcomes of this research and this type of research. And the policy implications of this sort of cost-benefit analysis in the context of Nepal, assessing the adaptation and mitigation synergies with the food security lens is important. Dr. Paudal raised the question about Nepal's historical agricultural policy as missing this kind of perspective of the science and economic and long-term, long-range sustainable planning. How can we do better? Whether it's in Nepal or any other part of the world. Very significant point about the feminization of agriculture was also brought up, incorporating gender, streamlining gender lenses and perspectives and experiences from the most underrepresented and marginalized segments of the Nepalese society. We must address those perspectives in any short or long range planning related to climate smart agriculture. So since I live in the United States, I thought I would talk a bit about recent US Department of Agricultural initiatives on climate smart agriculture. So recently there was a request for information from all stakeholders and the general public on the new climate smart agriculture and forest partnership initiative seeking any kind of comments and suggestions and input on the current state of climate smart commodity markets, the systems of quantifications, options and criteria for evaluation, the use of information collected, the potential protocols, the options for review and verification, and the inclusion of historically underserved communities. And the comments were especially encouraged from farmers and farmer organizations, commodity groups, livestock producer groups, environmental organizations, agriculture businesses and technology companies, environmental market organizations, renewable organizations, tribes and governments, organizations representing historically underrepresented producers, and organizations representing historically underrepresented communities and private corporations. So I will wrap up this discussion with this context and also with a couple of questions for Dr. Porter. First, actually 3 questions. First, based on conversations with farmers, which of these climate smart agriculture practices do you think are most sustainable and acceptable? And of course, you can use the findings from your research for your answer. And the second question, what are the practices and externalities that farmers understand and support and support the most? And the third question, do you have any thoughts on how current and national policies could better support and advance agricultural policies in a more inclusive way? And I gave you an example of sort of the US government, and there are plenty of other examples from all around the world about how governments are trying to really understand what local farmers want and how they can more effectively and more sustainably implement climate smart agriculture. What are your thoughts on that? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gyami. You also very nicely highlighted my presentation. I couldn't explain very well. You have done very good job. Okay, and you throw me a few questions, right? Like which CSA practices is economically feasible to the farmers? Yeah. From my research, I can say that the result I presented about based on NPV, IRR, NK ratio, BC ratio. However, we believe that irrigation is very important for the agriculture, but in the case of maize, irrigation is not profitable for the farmers because of high installation cost. And organic fertilizer seems to be economically viable and feasible to the farmers because its installation cost is low comparing to the returns comes from the organic fertilizer. Similarly, biopesticides and zero tillage, jab planters, are the important practices for the farmers. I'm saying that only based on my research, it doesn't necessary to apply in other area of Nepal, but we can scale out these practices in other region as well. Okay, one is this one. And another, you raise a question about externalities. So far I understood, yeah. In the case of externalities, several externalities like just let me check somewhere. Like carbon sequestration and these biodiversity and social harmony soil fertilities. These are the externalities generated by the CSA practices, and these externalities are, we collected these externalities from the stakeholders and farmers, and that are basically from qualitative perspective. So we are trying to monetize this perspective in, we are trying to monetize this qualitative perspective in monetary term as well. So in the this era, carbon sequestration would be the best externalities if we can calculate the carbon emission from the agriculture and sequestration from the cropland or agroforestry. So that would be the a good opportunity for us, as our target is also to be carbon neutral by 2050. So this would be the best one. Then other would be productivity. If we can increase productivity, because we are importing agriculture production yearly. Like last year, we imported like 30 arb Nepalese rupees agriculture production. So this productivity would be another externalities, and biodiversity. When we think from the perspective of biodiversity, environmental balanced, eco-friendly, this would be another externalities from CSA practices. So your another question is about national policy. How can we make national policy more inclusive? For the inclusiveness, we have to ensure the participation of all the stakeholders in policy formulation, policy implementation, policy review. Generally, in the case of Nepal, policy formulation is so funny. I have been working in policy review for some time, so I found it like just a funny work, because they just formulate the policy sitting on the chair. They don't do consultation with stakeholders, not participation of the beneficiaries. But the good news, Policy Research Institute has started rigorous policy formulation and policy review from the establishment of Policy Research Institute. Recently, we are in the formulation of Agriculture Policy 2078. For this one, Policy Research Institute has done 2-3 times stakeholder consultation. Despite of COVID pandemic, we have done virtual consultation with the stakeholders, experts, scientists, how we can make this agriculture policy inclusive. Like we did consultation with a gender expert as well. So this agriculture, I believe this agriculture policy will be more inclusive. So not only participation, I want to say meaningful participation of all the stakeholders in policy formulation. And while policy is formulated and started implementation, there should be we have to review periodically. In Policy Research Institute, currently, we are reviewing 22 policies. I am reviewing this National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy, and some of my colleagues are reviewing other policies. So we have developed one policy review framework as well. So we review the policy and provide feedback to Nepal government whether this policy is good for Nepal. If it is not good, then why we continue? We may drop it now. So we don't have to waste our investment. So for the inclusiveness, we have to ensure the participation of all the stakeholders and beneficiaries of the policies. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shravapodal. Excellent answers. I think we have at least one question in the chat. Dr. Khadka, should I ask it?
Yes, please go
Shall
ahead.
I? Okay.
Doctor.
All right. So PK is asking, thank you, Dr. Shobha, for the wonderful presentation, especially on the economic evaluation of CSA. I have one query. What could be the reasons for heterogeneity in the climate smart practices in comparison to conventional practices?
I'm also reading the question. I saw in the chat box. Yeah, in climate smart practices, farmers are applying different practices, and for these climate smart practices, they have received subsidies also for different practices like improved seed. They get subsidy from local agriculture knowledge center, and for solar water pump, and they they got some percent subsidies from municipalities. So in the conventional practices, they have done what they are doing from the generations, but in the case of CSA practices, they are trying to practice other several practices. So I think there are heterogeneity in climate smart practices comparing to the conventional practices. I think I can answer to PK properly. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Podel. The next question is from Devendra Gochan, Dr. Devendra Gochan. Thank you, Dr. Podel, for a nice presentation. Could you elaborate how much time horizon taken on the estimation of NPV and IIR for prioritized CSA technologies? Are technologies and CSA practices selected having same time horizon?
Yes, for the prioritization, the time period was only 4 years because they started climate smart practices since 2015, and we did field survey in 2019. For the prioritization, based on the practice time period, only 4 years, we have prioritized these practices. But in the case of estimation of NPV and IRR, we estimated 25 years for the NPV and IRR calculation, and all the practices have the same time horizon, 25 years. We assume 25 years for all the practices. Thank you, Dr. Devendra, sir.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Thapa has raised his hand.
Yes.
Are you speaking, Mr. Thapa?
Yes, madam, my question is for the Dr. Shobha, madam. Are you listening me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I am joining from Dang, which is one of the most fertile valleys, not just in Nepal, but in the world. My question is how and what consideration has the government of Nepal taken to incorporate the farmers on this task? And what I mean is most projects are extremely driven, but externally driven. But how can farmers also be involved in coming up with the local solution? Did you get my question, madam?
Yes, somehow I could catch. So let me reiterate, okay?
Okay.
What government have done to incorporate this
The farmers on this task.
farmers on this task, okay?
Okay.
Okay, especially thank you, Mr. Thapa, for your questions. So far I understand about government program and policies related to agriculture. Is working in agriculture sector for a long time, is from socio-economic perspective. Nepal government has done several things for the farmers, like most of the agriculture policies are for farmers, literally, yeah. But the problem is that it cannot reach to the farmer, and farmers cannot be benefited from the policy and program. The problem is in implementation. Main problem is in implementation. Like agriculture development strategies. We all know IIDS. This is the biggest program so far developed in Nepal. I think billions rupees are spent to develop agriculture development strategy. But it was developed before the federalization. And now the problem is the ownership of the program. The federal government initiated this program, but the problem is local government cannot take ownership of this program. So always problem with the implementation for this type of. And you means externally driven means I couldn't understand. You means from funded or other thing, like what do you mean by externally driven? Can you explain?
Yes, exactly. Funded by the foreign sector.
Oh.
And these farmers are always aside the working in the field to work with the to go with the parallelly with the plan.
Okay, for this one, to incorporate the farmers into the agriculture policy and program, Nepal government has started agriculture modernization project from 2017 around. It's already 5 years for the 10 years. So from this project, Nepal government are subsidizing farmers, and they have developed several pocket block zone for the commercialization of the local level production in the pocket level, block level, and they provide this tiller and tractor for the farmers, and some improved variety of seeds. Not all subsidy, but certain portion, like 70% subsidy. So Prime Minister Agriculture Modernization Project is a recent project that has more emphasis on local farmers. So far I can say that all for you. What Nepal government is doing for the farmers. This project is like very big project, about budget around 3 crore Nepalese rupees. So it is implementing all over Nepal, and recently there are several zones and super zone. I think farmers are benefited from this from Prime Minister Agriculture Modernization Project. Yeah.
So,
Madam, may I add something on it?
Okay.
Please go ahead, Mr. Thapa, and then Roshana Gautamji has a question.
Yeah, maybe we might have lost him, so maybe.
Okay, Roshana Gautamji, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Thank you so much, everyone. Namaste, everyone. And thank you so much, Dr. Paudel ma'am, for the very nice presentation. So my first question is that, out of 16 CSA practices, 6 were very well assessed, whether they were highly adopted by the farmers or not. And my second question is that, we have a very nice written paper form policies in Nepal, where the CSA practices should be implemented at the local level or at the community level, but we have a very much gap to implement that. So how we can promote the diffusion of CSA practices at the local level to make climate smart agriculture more productive or more useful for the small holder farmers in case of Nepal.
Could you sorry, Dr. Shoma, could you introduce yourself, please? Just a one-liner, if you don't mind, Ms. Gautam.
Yeah, I'm Rosna Gautam, and I work in Nepal Climate Change Project, and I'm from the agriculture sector.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Rosna. Very genuine question. And you raise a so nice question. Yeah, these 6 practices out of 16, these 6 are highly adopted by farmers. So for the last 4 years, they are applying these 6 practices, and based on their experience, they provide the value. We ask them provide the value to from 0 to 4, and these 6 practices got the higher value, and we calculate the average value, and then we selected 6 high valued practices. And your next question is how CSA how we can diffuse CSA at the local level. In my understanding, CSA is not new thing. I'm from the farmers family. My farmers are still doing agriculture in Chittagong. So I have grown up experiencing the farming activities. These CSA practices is not new. But how we can attract farmers for the CSA practices is we have to aware them about CSA practices. If what type of activities they are doing, we can aware them. For example, in our village where I have grown up, we used to make a small pond near our tap, and the wastewater from the tap used to store there, and we used to irrigate to our vegetables. So this is now called climate smart agriculture, but it is indigenous practice. So we can aware to the farmers, and we can teach to the farmers about the practices they are doing. Another thing is in conventional practice, like we apply fertilizers, or we show the seeds, and the high application of fertilizer is not good for the biodiversity, and it emits high carbon. And another thing is wet and dry in rice paddy field. And this type of evidence help us to aware to the farmers, so we can diffuse these practices to the local level. For this one, local government can collaborate with the agriculture knowledge center or scientist or expert to implement these practices in the local level. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Podel, and thanks to all the everyone who's still with us, everyone who's been attending the seminar. Dr. Khadka, shall we ask the last question?
Yes, please go ahead. I think
okay.
Someone has a question. Yes.
Yeah. This is from Yamuna Ghaleji. Thanks to IIDS for identifying the topic around agriculture and inviting two prominent women scholars as presenter and commentator. Thank you to both. Thanks to both the presenter and the commentator. I'm curious to know if you have any insights on how the CSA related technologies are being gender responsive.
Yes, this one very excellent question, Emuna ma'am. In the field for this CSA practices, when I was in the field, I had that type of feeling like installation of solar irrigation in the farm. It was so difficult for the female farmers because they were not well trained how to install the solar panel and how to make the tunnel. So most of the practices are not gender responsive, but these days, after the capacity building of female farmers, like they were trained to install the solar panel and tunnel farming. Now, CSA practices are being gender responsive in my experience, in my field level experience, and this is my first-hand experience. And other thing is like one female farmers were sharing her experience with me about like they were making green tunnel for the vegetable plantation, and it was very hard for her to install and to prepare the tunnel for vegetable plantation. But later she learned, she unlearned, she learned, then she could build herself. So main important thing is capacity building of female farmers for to apply the CSA practices. Yes, Emuna ma'am, thank you. Very genuine question.
Dr. Khadka, we have some more questions. Do we have time for them?
Yes, because this goes on, another 10 minutes. So Dr. Shrestha, please go ahead.
Okay, so, all right, so let's, okay, so I think Nishaji is asking, Dr. Paudel, I am also interested to know, while you are calculating the cost and benefit, were social cost and benefit also considered? That's one question from Nishaji. And then Prista Ratanaprok G is asking, thank you, Dr. Paudel. It is interesting to see how your analysis could show which of the various CSA practices have the highest NPV for each crop. I have two questions about choices of crop and about food security. Question one, for each agriculture area, some crops are more climate smart choices than other crops. When farmers try to decide what crops to cultivate, their choices may depend on a range of factors, including taste, habit, what they are used to growing. To what extent do farmers consider climate smart factor when choosing what to cultivate? Can we use your framework of analysis to answer which crops are climate smart choices for each agricultural location? And one more question. Can we be assured that the farmer will continue the CSA practices as the subsidies are not available continuously? Oh, and I think Prista Ratanaprokji has one more question. Can we use your framework of analysis to answer which crops are climate smart choices for each agricultural location? Okay, that was already in previous comments. And Pankaj Koiralaji is saying he has a similar question to Salinaji.
Okay.
So Shavaji, Dr. Shavak Paudel, you have a lot of questions. Please, you're able to answer them.
Yeah, I will try as so far as possible. Nisaji, social cost and benefit are also considered. Here, we consider social harmony, how the social relationship build after CSA implementation. For this one, we try to know the social harmony, and we do the stakeholder consultation, how we monetize this harmony. Then we also consider the social cost and benefit for Nisaji's answer. And Prista has so long question about 2C analysis. Could you show which of various parts have the highest and forage crop? Okay, I have two questions about choices of crop, about food security. Some crops are more climate smart choices than other crops. May depend on range of factor, habit. Which crops are climate smart choices for agriculture, forage? Okay. Prista, thank you. You have lots of questions. Yeah. For choices of crops, they choose the crops what they have been practicing for a long time, and they apply CSA practices for these crops. Yeah. And about food security, yeah, you are right. Their choices may depend on different range of factors, but in the case of my study area, they chose these crops because they got the subsidy on improved variety, one thing, and another thing is the crops that can well grown in this area. These are the factors they choose these crops. And can you use your framework to analyze which crops are climate choices for these agriculture? Yes, of course, we can apply this framework to for the agriculture practices in different locations. But I already mentioned that climate smart agriculture is also location specific, because the feasible technology or practices in one location doesn't necessarily apply the same in another location. However, we can apply this framework to prioritize the CSA practices. Yeah, and Salina ji, how can we assure that farmers will continue? Okay, your question is also very nice. Now, this subsidy program is also localized. Initially, CGIAR, CCAFS started this climate smart village and climate smart technology practices in different locations, but now local government, in the case of my study area, this Madhyabindu and Devchuli Nagarpalika in Nawalpur, now this program is handed to the local government, and all local government is accountable for the CSA practices in this area. And in the regarding the subsidies, some of the practices, farmers already started to generate income. So their lifestyle is changed, their status of food security is changed. So I believe that after the the stop of the subsidy also, farmers continue the CSA practices for sure. And another is, can you use framework? There are several questions. Okay, Pankaj has another question. Do you observe any heterogeneity in CSA across farm size? Yes. For this one, we observe heterogeneity in CSA across farm size. So for our research, we convert all the farm size in one uniform unit, like For example, the production of in the case of landholding size is also not like uniform. So we convert to the landholding size in per hectare for the uniformity of the CSA practices. Yeah, then another question is crops. I think this question is also I have already answered. Yeah, and if you have any questions or further, if you want to discuss with me, you can write me in my personal email. I think that I can share with you. Or I am available in Twitter or Facebook also. You can drop me message. It would be very good to learn from you and to discuss with you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paudel and all participants. Dr. Khadka will now wrap up the session.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Shrestha. Well, Dr. Shobha Paudel, thank you so much for your insightful presentation, and Dr. Gyami Shrestha, thank you for your comments. I'd also like to thank all the participants for taking the time to attend this webinar number 15. Next month, we're going to be having webinar number 16 on 7th March. So I hope to see you all then. Thank you so much. Bye-bye and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you very much.